Welcome to the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we, a business owner and an artist, discuss the business of art and the art of business. Hey friends, I'm Carl, founder of Epic Made.
And I'm Ross, creative director at Epic Made. And we're both the hosts of the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we share our thoughts on creativity, art, and business. Past guests include Marcy Selsberg of Blah Blah Blah, Joe Weaver of OceanT.com, and Rebecca Blake of the Graphic Artists Guild.
We are forever grateful for the sponsors and supporters of our podcast. As always, we are looking for more sponsors. That said, Pixel Retentive is always brought to you by the creative gurus at Epic Made. Epic Made is a team of artists and strategists with a mastery of visual storytelling. Our studio makes unforgettable animation and graphic illustration infused with ideas that put money in your pocket. We best serve marketers and brands seeking to engage nerdy millennials, and some of our favorite clients include Nickelodeon, WWE, and Sci-Fi. Visit getepicmade.com and let's collaborate on your next creative campaign.
With us today, we have Josh Hill, one of the executive leaders at Left Field Labs. Josh is a former athlete who accidentally fell into the creative industry. During 20 years in the industry, he's held creative, marketing, strategy, and sales titles, and found that in a world of specialists, he was not one. Since then, he's discovered and embraced his unique abilities and now proudly calls himself a creative generalist. Welcome, Josh. Pleasure to have you.
Good to be here, guys.
Yeah, man. So stoked you could make it, brother. So, as I mentioned, I'd love to just jump in a little bit right out the gate here. What is a creative generalist to you? And tell me why that's a point of pride for you.
It's a term that I made up to try to describe myself. But I think, in a time when I was kind of making my way in the industry, in the creative industry, there was a lot of discussion around, like, you need to be a specialist. Like, I don't know if you guys remember this time where it was like everybody needs to niche down and all this stuff. And man, I felt really out of place in that world. Like, my background was not that. I was like, I could go really wide on a lot of topics, but not very deep on a bunch of them, which made me dangerous in both directions. And I bucked that for a long time. I tried to figure out what is my area that I can, like, own and dominate. And then realized, man, like, I don't have, like, maybe my area to own and dominate is I can go wide and talk to a lot of people about a lot of different things. And my background in and around creative industries and shops is a valuable skill to embrace. And so then I read a book by a guy named David Epstein, no relation to
No relation to the
it was called Range, and in that book, he really talked about in a world of specialists, like how generalists are kind of poised to kind of take over, and it just rang true, like in a lot of ways. And he talks a lot about parallels to sports, which is my background, and then brings that through into the workplace. And I found that kind of really gave me some liberty to embrace it a little bit more, and to own it, and to really, like, see it as a gift and a superpower, as opposed to a weakness, which is kind of how I always felt like I had a little bit of a limp when I went into things. And so that's where it came from, and I think it served me well in my career so far, and so I'm kind of leaning into it a bit more than I had previously.
I love that. And I think the idea that I remember that time where it's like, oh, you need specialists. And it's like, yes, there's a time and a place for specialists, but I think it's the generalists that's going to come up with the best strategies and the best ideas, because they have the best overall picture of all the things, right? And they understand enough of it to see how this piece connects to that piece, But if you don't have that big picture, you can't put it all together. So I think they're both needed, So
yeah, they're definitely both needed. There's definitely a place for specialists, but I think you need at least one generalist. And like you said, they're usually the person driving the ship because they have a big picture understanding of the situation.
Yeah. There's a role for everybody, right? Like, and there's a need. We're not all trying to cross over. And I think I found I was a really terrible specialist in a lot of different areas that I tried to be. And so clearly pushed me out of that domain expertise.
Yeah. Well, I think it served you clearly from your track record, which, I'm sure we can get into a little bit. But so my other little question that I like to start off with, because that threw me off my routine. So I want, tell us about your project you're most proud of in your career so far.
Wow. It's probably, I've had the chance to work with a lot of really kind of global companies and big brands, stuff that everybody would expect to see in a portfolio. I think some of the stuff that I'm most proud of is the stuff that has helped the business contextually in a time where it was difficult. So, I was at an agency at one time that was trying to jump into, I guys remember a time when people were selling websites for $20,000 and everybody, it just was and people were trying to push up, how do you sell creative services that are feeling commoditized for $100,000, right? When you were trying to step into the next, step. And so I remember the first time I stepped from I sold a website for $5,000. And then I remember stepping into doing it for a little bit more and then taking that step further. But I think the thing that I'm probably most proud of is really kind of right-sizing a project that started to go really wrong for a client, and the client was the problem. And so instead of leaning into our team and pushing back as much as we could have, I really kind of saw it as a time to build a relationship and embrace the challenge and to help guide them through that. And it was, at the time, this was probably 7-10 years ago, but it was really formative to me to understand how relationships are built and how they build long-term partnerships in business based on trust, right? At the end of the day, I was doing something that many other people and or companies could do. And so, I think that was something that I was really proud of. And then there's a big data company that you guys have probably don't know, but may have heard of. It's called Snowflake. And they're cloud data company kind of everywhere now. But I was in the room with them when they were 10 people and designing the logo. So I designed the logo for this company. It's a tech, kind of giant now, but remember going back and forth of rounds of logos with the founder and the initial CEO of this company when I'm telling you, there were 15 people and now they're a multi-billion-dollar company. So that story to see that ascent and have be on the ground level is a pretty interesting one as well.
You're muted, Carl.
Yeah, dude, that's so cool. Sorry about that. I can't even imagine having the scale on that and getting to be it's almost like when you hear those people talk about oh yeah, I used to listen to that band when
right.
And
yeah,
there was 15 people in a back room with a little hole in the wall. Same kind of
yeah. And they kept the logo it's still the same thing
yeah,
we designed, which is cool. So yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate to work on some really big ambitious projects. So some that I've had my hand in on some of the emerging tech stuff over the past 5 years. I've had the chance to work really closely with Meta on some of their releases of the smart glasses and the first version of those smart glasses, which has been an incredible shift in journey, and has been a cool story as well. But I think some of it comes back to just the person side of it, the human side of what we do. So yeah, pretty fun stuff.
absolutely.
Sure, man.
So, and actually jumping off from that sort of human connection, what I figured we could talk about today was discussing kind of what it's like to operate in a remote space as a creative. So remote partnerships, remote brainstorming sessions and strategy, even work-life balance and things like that. We're, Carl and I working in Epic Made, we've been purely remote since COVID, but we were remote. We only had an office because it was somewhere where we could meet clients sort of mutually at a local level. Like we didn't really work there very often. I think Carl did just so he can get away from all the insanity that is his household. But yeah, I mean, a large majority of the studio has been remote for a really long time, since before it was cool. And I know you've kind of been operating in the same way. You're remote exclusively for Left Field Labs, right?
Yeah. I've background, I guess, is like I'm based in Virginia. All of us VA 757, right?
Yep.
But I've been working remotely for a company that's been based in California, both San Francisco and LA, for 11 years. And before that, I was remote for an agency that was doing remote, like back in the day, before it was cool, right? Like you said. So I've kind of never had in the past 12 years, I haven't had like a traditional office, setup and experience like many people are familiar with. So I've kind of been through the ebbs and flows of what's happened in our industry, what COVID did, and everybody jumped on, and I kind of had a little bit of a head start to some general best practices that I had helped establish for myself. And then, operating a creative agency inside of, what those realities are as well. So, I mean, I think to get really tactical, like some of this fun stuff for me is like, I just had to figure out how I work best. And I think that was a little bit of a learning curve for me. I don't know how you guys are, but like as a creative, like I very much feed off of the energy of people and other people. And that's really hard to replicate in a remote environment where we're just in this type of like setting all the time. And so, regardless, I am in this setting all the time. And I try to augment that by human interaction and non-family human interaction when I can. So getting into like co-working spaces, we've got a few of them in our area that I try to get into it several times a week. And that does a lot for, I don't want to say my mental health, but like my energy.
Grounding yourself, kind of.
Totally. Like, even if it's non-industry specific conversations that I'm having conversations with other people that I don't work with and I don't live with, right? Like, and so that is fuels a lot of what I do. I think, some of the other stuff too is like, I work on Pacific Coast time zone for the most part. So like my whole life is kind of effed up as far as
it's
figuring out logistics and like kids' school and my kids do extracurriculars and sports and doing that right at the time that I'm supposed to be in like a meeting or a phone call for a client at 7 p.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. Pacific. That stuff's the stuff that you gotta figure out.
It's a dance for sure. I mean, you guys have seen like my whole family's running in and out behind the podcast here. It's you have to make it work. And I think that the cool thing that happened since it became cool to remote work is that a lot of that stuff's kind of expected now. Like there's no stigma about it. It's just okay. Like we're all living to support our families and have a nice life, and they're included in how we have to plan our days and juggle things. I think people are a lot more.
I think so too. I think
receptive to it.
Yeah.
I think there's been a real, improvement on expectation of what like a remote meeting and these types of like virtual meetings are. I remember like it used to still be like the expectation very buttoned up. Like you wouldn't, if you had a distraction in the middle of the meeting, it was something, you guys saw that old clip a while ago where the newscaster and his kid comes in and he like pretends he doesn't see, and his wife comes in like crawling, pulls him out, closes the door. Like it used to be kind of like that was the feeling. And now I think people, because we're all doing this together, there's a lot more empathy and understanding for like what we're dealing with. So interruptions are, expected and tolerable, and sometimes even bring that humanity into this world that we have on screens together. So I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but like I lean into it a little bit more now than I have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot less jarring for people, I think. I think before, because it wasn't sort of a standardized practice for the average office or the average company, or it had never been a standardized practice. People, when they saw it, there was this weird stigma. It's not much different than like the millennial stigma of like,
Right.
oh, you guys are taking a shortcut, just go to work.
Right.
I mean, and so I feel like there's a little bit of that fear that has been taken off when the whole world had to do it for a while. And, going back to kind of what you said about the whole like work-life balance and scheduling side of things, and like I've been working from home probably since I graduated college in 2013, or very close to it, right? At the very least, half of my job or part of my job has been remote. And so it's like when COVID hit, everyone else was freaking out about like, oh my God, I can't stay home. Like I can't even get anything done or whatever. And I was just sort of chilling. But I constantly try new stuff to be more productive because there are so many temptations, and it's very easy to think that you're being productive while working from home when you're actually not
Totally.
in the same kind of sort of headspace and zone. Like I started realizing that by about by like 1:00, I really can't focus on like production based work. Like it has to be like meetings and brainstorming and planning for the next day.
Yeah.
And so I actually started waking up at 6 a.m.
I'm not
So,
that type of dude, man. You and I are opposites.
but your whole day is also shifted
Yeah,
like
it's true.
significantly farther than mine. But like, and because I mean, I work in some instances, like we work with some artists in France. We work with some artists. I have an artist in Indonesia who's 12 hours ahead of me. And so in some instances, that is a benefit that I wake up so early. But I do it for me because I sit down and it's just quiet. Like nobody's messaging me. Nobody's like, even while I'm working, like my wife doesn't usually come in and like talk to me during office hours, but even Epic Made, employees and artists and Carl or anybody, no one's like pulling my attention. Like I just sit there with my own checklist and get to knock stuff out. And I feel accomplished by the time I start getting my attention pulled. And so I feel a lot less frustrated about it. I feel a lot less sort of abrasive, like, oh, I can only spend so much time with you because I have to do this thing.
Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think I've learned to really make the morning sacred for me on the planning stuff, because I've got a couple hours before the rest of my team and our clients kind of wake up and start getting active on Slack and everything. So it's been like that as well. But it's funny. I find that I start to measure, to your point about productivity, like I measure productivity and not hours anymore. Like, so like, I feel like that's the gauge for me, is like, in a world where like there's always to-dos and a list of things that I think can become a trap. I try to measure how productive I was that day, not like how many things I got done. And I think that's really been a helpful shift for me. I heard somebody, and I'm curious like how you guys think about this, but like I heard somebody talking a while ago, and I started to try to apply this practice. So what I do in the morning now is I make a list of like, the 3 to 5 things that I need to get done with that day. And I'm like a serial procrastinator, like terrible procrastinator. And so I will put things off until the very, very last minute. I have many stories, and maybe we can talk about one when we have time, but I now try to take the thing that I want to do least and do it first. And I start to feel like I start my day with a sense of like, it's like an accomplishment, right? Like I accomplished a thing that I knew I was pushing off until it would be 12 and 1:30. Like I'm telling you guys, like the other week I had a proposal that was due at the end of the day on like a Friday. And the end of the day on the Friday, like kind of came and the proposal wasn't done. And I'm like, end of day, like, is that 5 o'clock Pacific or is that like before midnight? And like, you know, like I just started creeping right up in there. And I mean, I honestly like do my best work when it comes to crunch time too. So like, it's one of those weird things that as a creative, like I used to like, now I embrace it, but try to give myself barriers and like, you know, boundaries so I don't F my world up too much. But yeah, I start my day trying to tackle the thing that I want to do least first.
These are all textbook ADD things.
100%.
So,
like, yeah, for sure.
And your solutions are textbook ADD solutions, which is fantastic. So yeah, I think I can 100% relate to all of that. And I do like that idea. I think I am going to apply more of that, though, that idea of like, here's the list. This is the one that sucks the most, and I'm going to start there because sometimes I play that mental jumping game of, oh, I can do this one real fast, or I'll do that one. I'll get some momentum, and I'll tell myself all these lies, and then I don't get to it that day unless I need to. And same thing in college, man. Like I never did anything until this 20-hour project that's due tomorrow. I'll start it today, and I'll work all the way up until I need to leave for class and not sleep at all. And I'll get an A on it, but like, who wants to live that way? Like, my back just hurts thinking about staying up doing an art project all night. Like,
yeah. I ran into, so to your point, I make a list the night before. So my schedule looks like start the day running on stuff I already knew I needed to do. I went to sleep knowing I needed to do this thing, got up and was like, okay, you need to do this thing. Get it done. The afternoon, so I have lunch every day with my wife, and when I get back to work, that's like that's intake information time, right? So the morning is output, afternoon is intake information, learn new problems, help other artists with, since I'm the creative director for Epic Made, a lot of the time I end up having to guide a lot of the projects.
You entirely run the projects, Russ.
I know.
I don't touch them at all. It's all you, dog.
I know, but I'm saying that like we have a lot of really skilled artists on the team, and I don't have to. There are phases of the project where I can go days without necessarily having to have input on them.
Okay.
And so I'll basically use the afternoon to intake information, and then I will use my evening when I'm just chilling in bed to set up the list for the next day, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, I don't, for better or for worse, I don't gauge my time in hours because I don't mind doing this list while I'm watching Netflix.
Yeah.
And so like, it doesn't feel like I'm working overtime or doing this like long elongated day, when in reality I'm working based on how I want to feel accomplished. And I actually started, I'm a very analytical person, and I set up a Google Keep, and each sort of bullet point on the list is an hour. So it's 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m. And I basically just have below all of that, I have just like a dump list, like an info dump list of tasks that I write down as I get them.
Yeah.
Right. And then I just in that evening, I will move those things into the hour slots of the next day.
Yeah.
And just kind of assign them then, because I found out, I sort of realized that I inadvertently chase the dopamine of getting like stuff done in quick succession.
Yeah.
And so if I just let it, if I work entirely unplanned, I will take the smallest projects that I can do and stack them until my day is over.
Totally.
Right. Like, and I will consistently push the big, scary, larger, longer task for days, thinking I'm being productive because I'm still constantly doing the smaller tasks.
Yeah.
Thing is about those though, they keep coming.
Well, they're always maintenance and not from.
It's also
trap. It's a trap, right?
Yeah, it's a trap.
And I think it's when it comes back to me, it's like impact, right? Like I try to spend the majority of my time where it's going to be the most impactful. And some of that stuff doesn't like hit a timesheet quite well, or doesn't check a box quite like I finished or completed this thing. And I think that's like what I would tell my younger self is like focus on the stuff where you can have the most impact and focus the majority of your energy there. You have to do the administrative stuff. Like that stuff is, is necessary. But I think, for somebody who wanted to feel this dopamine hit and got like a lot of like feeling like I could point to, but I got a bunch of stuff done. Look, I checked off lists, but it's like, that stuff really didn't move the needle much that day, right? Like the stuff that's going to move the needle the most, that's where I try to put the majority of my energy throughout my day.
And it's funny, I think, I don't know if you guys had retail jobs or any sort of like more commoditized job before you got into, what I would consider an office job, right? But you're kind of trained away from that in retail, right? Where you're constant, the list never fucking ends.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can get, but you want to be impactful in retail, or you want to be impactful in like what I would consider to be, an entry level job.
Yeah.
And you just realize that if you spend this amount of time being impactful in your head, you've just the list just
it gets bigger.
It gets bigger, and the it's never going to stop. So literally, you just make more work for yourself later, and so you're sort of trained to just keep it moving.
Interesting. My background, Ross, like I think it's funny to get that split on like where and how my view kind of got shaped. My whole like work career has been in the service industry. I kind of first job started in the service industry, like when I was like 14, started bagging groceries, and like quickly learned like, oh, like I can take some groceries out for people and they maybe try to make a little bit extra money. Then I started like, I think my first like real job was I worked at one of the local hotels as a valet and a bellman. And man, did I learn the value of like what was important to people and how to find out what those unspoken things that were important to people were, and then prioritize those things. So for some people, it's like, where is my car parked? How quickly can I see it? I want it to be like here or there. Other people was like, how fast can you fetch this for me? Can you do some favors for me? Like, ultimately what I started to find out was like, man, like if you can read people and find out what is important to people, and I was really able to do that at a young age. So like I was on a hustle and a grind and was like stacking up dozens of dollars at a time. In a time where you get $120 a night or something that felt like $1 million, right? Like it was not much, but I was figuring out like where can I be the most valuable and what's important to people like that. I think ultimately I didn't know it at the time, but would really shape a lot of like the work that I do now, right? It's still a people-centered business, and what we do is services, but people have the choice to work with anybody they want. The type of work we do, many other great agencies and other people do as well, right? So what's going to separate you, I think, is really coming down to the experience that you provide to them and your ability to understand and guide them to, through some stuff that they may not even know about. So my early working career and those like first jobs really was instrumental in like putting this framework of like hustle and read people, and then find people that can do what you're doing for cheaper and you'll make money, right? Like, even the like outsourcing model was then I would literally like when I was running stuff at the Cavalier Hotel at the time, like I
also worked at the Cavalier Hotel.
Amazing. I think anybody in this area has spent a summer or two in the Cavalier. And so
may have trespassed in the pool a few times when I lived next door, but
Okay. Okay.
I set my hand on fire doing banquets. It was great.
Oh yeah, on the banquet side, yeah, funny man. If you're in our area, then you've been through the old Cavalier Hotel. So yeah. Anyways, I spent a lot of time there, and I would like be paying guys to get cars for me. Like, guys would come give me a 20, and then I would pay a bellman $5 to go get it, and then another guy would be right there behind me or behind him. So I'd take his, and I would be doubling up. Like I'd be like working the system. So yeah, it's funny to see like how those early jobs started to shape where we are now.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, man. Yeah, it's like the skills and the human skills, like the soft skills that you learn there, can be applied to anything. There's still human beings trying to get value for something that they're paying for, and you figuring out a way to deliver that to them in the best way possible. Like I learned the same kind of thing, but I was doing Gold Key, right? Like I was trying to convince people on a perfectly good vacation to go sit in this timeshare presentation for 90 minutes, and I'll give you like a free $50, but you probably spent 10, 15 grand to get down here. $50 ain't shit. And so like I had to like present this in a way that made sense. And I think that that's like what allowed me to build a business off of my own sales capabilities, right? Like just having this street hustle, right? Like, because now I'm actually good.
It's interesting. I mean, I've got 3 kids, and I think that like I want to very much impart this like drive and this hustle and this grit in them to be able to like, you call it entrepreneurship, you call it whatever you want, like, but the ability to go be able to make and create for yourself based on your own like drive is something that I'm really hopeful. They have more advantage than I did at the time, like the life and the time and just the where they're living at now. I didn't have many of the same fortunes that they did. And so like, it's funny, as a parent, I find myself in this mix of trying to go, I want to provide a better life for you than the one that I had, but I also want you to be like a little bit gritty and raw and like have some dog in you and still be able to get it. And so like that balance of like, how do you create that? So I'm still like stumbling through how to figure that out with to instill to my kids.
It's hard. It's so hard because softness and comfortability doesn't build rigidity, doesn't build strength. Totally. It doesn't build resilience. So like that, but I struggle with the exact same thing. It's interesting.
Do you guys listen to Professor Galloway, Prof G at all? Do you know him?
A little bit. I'll listen to a couple of his podcasts.
Yeah, he talks a bit about this. He's an NYU professor, and it just kind of everywhere now has been in around tech, and kind of studies the human condition a lot. And so he talks a lot about how the world that we're living in and the technology that's available, and and how the key thing he when he ran his firm, and this is I found really interesting. I've got my oldest 2 I've got 2 girls, 14 and 11, and he said that when he was running his firm, very data driven firm, 150 or 200 people I think at the time, and they talked a lot about what factors would they be able to identify in successful people and hires, because they were hiring a lot of young talent coming through, and they said it was really, really, really clear once the data came in. He had since sold his firm, so he was like, I can talk about this now, but if they went to a prestigious university, it was like prestigious university made a massive difference because they would have had to like work their tail off, not because not because their education was so much better. Prestigious university and network, I think, probably effective of the university.
Okay.
If they played a competitive sport, an individual competitive sport. So he was like wrestling, swimming, diving, tennis, an individual sport, and if they were female. So he said, so like what I couldn't tell you then, but I can tell you now, is that if a Yale graduate from the gymnastics team came in, she was like an automatic hire. And he was talking about it, the reason, because if you're able to put yourself through that, then you are have the internal makeup and the fortitude in order to be successful in a high pressure environment that they were putting them in. And I think I look back at some of the things that I know of really successful people that I personally know and follow. And a lot of those traits are also there. I think that I've found that pretty interesting to correlate through. I didn't go to a prestigious university. I didn't play in an individual sport, and I am not female, so I am clearly not not tracking towards success.
Swing and a miss on all three.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense because a lot of that stuff is internal makeup that you can't teach. Like, it has to be burned into you. And a lot of companies that hire based on knowledge, they end up with high turnover because if you're not gauging any other factor other than just experience and knowledge, then you have no idea who this person is.
Totally.
And so I think that's what those like three factors kind of ultimately boil down to is this person is capable of discipline, they're capable of team, they want to win, or they wouldn't have joined a sport that they don't get help with. Like, it's not a team sport, it's a solo sport. And obviously being female as opposed to male obviously comes with its own challenges that you have to overcome.
I think that the things that I take and I look at some of this stuff, like, he was making the correlation, and then, we don't have to sit on this for too long, but I think the thing about, like, he said, if somebody was rowing crew, he said, then I knew, or the person, he said, I knew that they would, if you're willing to kill yourself for that, and be able to, like, mentally be able to overcome and get up at 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning and put yourself through that grind, then you can make it if you're put into a high pressure environment that's going to be grueling in the world that we are, in now. So, interesting. Not sure I would say put the same criteria across the industries that I'm in, but interesting talking point for sure.
Yeah, I think it's just something to look for, right? Like, it's not that the criteria in itself is useful in a vacuum, but that
for sure,
just the idea that when you're looking at somebody that you're trying to work with, whether that's hiring them or even for people who are in an interview trying to get hired, focusing on the stuff that makes you valuable as a human, as someone who is going to be reliable and a sturdy resource within the company when shit goes, awry. That focusing on that stuff in an interview makes, your opposition significantly more comfortable.
Well, let's tie this all into remote working, right? So I've been hiring people to run my agency and do the things I need them to do as a remote worker since, 2007. I think I hired my first staff in like 2011, 2012, maybe 2010, something like that. I did it just all myself for the first couple of years. And yeah, someone can have all the talent in the world, tons of great soft skills, and not be able to do all the management, the self-management things we've been talking about making our list and doing the things and having all that self-regulation. And so finding someone that already has a bit of an entrepreneur spirit in them, already does a fair amount of freelancing work and that kind of stuff, those are automatically like, okay, this person can get up and get their shit done without someone having to hold their hand and make them their own checklist and all the little things that kind of go into that. And some people need that structure, and those people aren't a good fit for a remote position. Some people need to go into an office and have a very set, like I do A, B, C, D, E, and I go home, right? Like, and that doesn't really work in our industry, I think, very often.
I think it's in my experience, it's been very dependent on the role that you're expecting them to to fill in the agency, right? Like I think whether they can do it and whether they're going to be they're going to perform well when doing it and be able to like sustain in that role, I think aren't always the same thing. So, you know, there are high performers and unicorns that can find a way, but those are not the people that you're primarily hiring, right? Like those are the rarities, I think, to come across, and you get them, you can identify them, and they thrive, and they climb the ladder quickly, they get promoted, and you know, they carve out space for themselves. But the other people, like, you've got to put the scaffolding around them to put them in a position to be successful in a remote like role.
Sure.
I think that is really hard, like really, really hard, because you can have somebody that knows how to like manage themselves, but if they're not having the right reviews, and you give them too much like, you know, too much freedom, then, you know, they can quickly like, I guess these self-corrections, if they're not the right self-corrections, they can be working in a direction that not the direction that you want them to be headed, and it be feeling productive, but not really being as impactful as, you know, you want them to be. So I find that like that stuff is really, really hard. And I think you balance that by a world where we kind of give talented people a lot of freedom and say, hey, we don't want to micromanage you. And so I think like it's really difficult in a remote environment to go, I don't want to micromanage you. I'm going to give you freedom, but I don't want to give you too much freedom, because you need to have some and in a world where you can't hover over and look at somebody's, you know, screen as easily and like kind of like talk through stuff. I think that's the stuff that in office culture provides that like is just not replicatable to the same degree in a remote environment. Like,
Totally.
you know, it's just not.
Yeah, because we don't want to live stream our screens and like be in like a group chat all day where you can just turn your mic on and off.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't feel natural, right? Like you do it, and we do it because you have to, and we've found systems to like make the remote thing work for us. But you put you guys and your team in a room together, and you start like you jamming together. You got some music on. You're like all like having a good time. Like those moments of creative and like genius come out of unstructured like structure. You know, like that stuff is really hard to replicate. And I think what me and our agency and the agencies that I've been a part of like have always been like trying to evolve to figure out how to do that balance. And, you know, we Left Field has been a remote first company for, 3 or 4 years now. We have an office in LA, and then we're like opened up the hiring kind of band to look across the US, and we started to like expand a little bit like that. And then we shut down the office, and we're like, hey, we're remote and now people are just like really, really desire to go back to the office again, right? Like, how do we create more of these moments? And I think outside of just productivity, then you also talk about culture stuff that's also really harder to be. It's a harder challenge to think about building culture remotely than something that kind of organically can happen a little bit easier inside of like, you know, an in-office environment. So all that stuff is, I think is stuff that I've wrestled with and still like in my day-to-day that I am fumbling through, to be quite honest, like trying to figure out what worked 3 years ago doesn't work now. What, you know, it feels like the goalpost is always moving, and that's just the nature of our industry, right? That's just always how it's going to be. So
yeah, for sure.
So we are actually coming up on time. So before we wrap, Josh, I did have one last question for you. Is there anyone or anything in your career that you'd like to shout out to the audience? Maybe it's a mentor, a valuable resource, a favorite client. We just like our guests to kind of share the love at the end of the podcast.
And I've been really fortunate to work with and for some great managers. And I'm still currently like under one of the best people manager that I've been under, Ken Rivera at Left Field. I've really been fortunate to be given opportunities before I deserved them. And there have been a few people that have done that for me, like early in my career. That was a guy named Drew Webb, who runs a shop that we know at Afari. Him and a guy named David Sudharma. Like David and Drew kind of gave me a shot when I was in a tight spot and trying to figure out who I was and what I was going to do next. And and I think there have been many others along the way. And then, like, going back to resources, I'm a like chronic read half of a book guy and like kind of make decisions about, I think I got the most of this. And then I talk about it like I read the whole thing. If you want to read like a half of a book, I can tell you that the half of the books that I'm going to like suggest, the first half are good. And I'm assuming the second half is too. But that book Range by David Epstein is and this is going back to this idea of like generalist and originals is another one by Adam Grant. I would, if anybody's like trying to figure out where they sit in that stuff, kind of like sparks interest to you, like those two books, Generalist, Originals by Adam Grant and Range by David Epstein. Those two books will kind of get you going and start to turn some gears in your head. So yeah, this has been fun. Thanks for having me on, guys. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. And a big shout out to Lunch Club. That's a platform that people like Josh and I started using probably more heavily in COVID than that's probably when you got into it, I would assume, Josh. Yeah. That's when I got it. And it's just been a great platform to network and meet people, even people who you grew up with their siblings and went to the same high school and never met them before, like Josh and I. So right. Josh is a couple years older than me, and Lunch Club paired us up with its algorithm, and then we, Josh quickly connected the dots, like, hey, pretty sure you live in the backyard here somewhere. So, and now we've been friends. So
you guys swiped right.
That's so funny.
We just, we respected the bald white guy-ness that we both brought to the table. So.
I'm trying to hide it with his beanie today, but I don't think I'm doing a very good job. But it's clearly united us.
I stole it all.
Yeah. He was fully gray at like 28 though.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny to see how like worlds kind of get pulled together. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. And that's so good to go.
Jesus Christ, Carl. Well, we've been talking with Josh Hill, who is one of the executive leaders at Left Field Labs. You can check out their website at leftfieldlabs.com. If listeners want to follow up with you directly, though, Josh, how should they do that?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. I think it's like LinkedIn / you find my picture. I'm bald and have glasses on, I think. So
Josh Hill, Left Field Labs, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll show up.
Yeah, type me in there. I'd love to connect with anybody, for sure.
Awesome. All right, Josh. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. And until next time, friends, we'll see you later.
Peace.
We really hope you enjoyed the show. Please like and subscribe to join us on our next journey through the world of art and business on the Pixel Retentive Podcast.